Hey guys, Sean Corbett here. I've got a special guest today. His name is Ruben Esquerda, and
Perfect.
he's actually, I've run into him for actually a number of years now.
Yeah.
He's in the office building with me, and we're both in the real estate space. He
hmm
specifically is kind of in a different area that I'm in, and we were just kind of thinking about the commonalities that we have and the impact of politics, the impact of insurance rates and tax rates, and building costs are direct influencers on our business and how busy we are.
hmm
But I wanted to kind of talk to him about his business, and it's at a whole nother level of things that he's working with than versus me working in the residential space. So, well, let's kind of start it off. So you work for Blue Ridge Atlantic.
Great.
You say purposely you don't do much social media stuff. You're hiding from everyone. You work for the FBI, Secret Service.
Something like that. Yeah.
He deals with a lot of politics just as the nature of the business.
Yeah.
And I think he wants to stay kind of a low profile with a lot of that. So he promises he's going to give us some juicy things to ruin his career right now. He's VP of development.
Correct. Yep.
That's his role and his title there. And Blue Ridge Atlantic, is there kind of a concise way of describing what their business is?
Yeah. So I think the best way to describe them, we typically go under the umbrella of affordable housing or attainable housing, which to explain kind of what that is it's best to sort of compare how we're different than sort of the traditional market rate developers. So our shop, we're a development shop, which means that we take raw land or an existing building or an existing property, whether it's multifamily or converting an old hotel or whatever it is, and creating housing for families, seniors. We also do what's called supportive housing, which is housing for those that are impacted by domestic abuse, homeless veterans, very folks that are very much in need. So whereas the market rate folks, they typically say we have a piece of property and we're trying to maximize the net operating income and try to, get as much cash flow as possible because we can then leverage that and raise as much equity as possible that hits all these various metrics. The affordable housing space is very different in that the program was started back in the 80s and specifically the low income housing tax credit program. And what it
So that
does,
initiated all of this, and you said that was under Reagan, right?
I believe it was under the Reagan administration. And at that time, to kind of put you back in that place, America was looking at public housing and was thinking, okay, this is not working. They were trying to figure out what they're doing with Section 8. They said, well, what if we created, or sort of, best way to kind of say it is it was sort of privatizing affordable housing to where
Okay.
it wasn't just necessarily on the burden wasn't solely on the government.
So you are not a not profit. You are a for-profit company
For profit.
that's
Correct.
operating in the space of affordable housing.
Correct. I mean, we are a for-profit developer. There are nonprofit developers as well, and we all sort of do similar things. It's just sort of like we end up doing very mission-oriented type things, but at the end of the day, we're not doing it just for fun. We're doing it for profit
Okay.
in the
You're not
form of
publicly traded or anything like that.
correct
Just a
privately held.
private company,
hmm
privately owned. Now you mentioned raw land and conversion. This is kind of the things that you and I have talked about in passing a few times. Your conversion opportunities, where you take a pre-existing government building, maybe taken over. Maybe they took over a space or a building, and then you can go into that building and actually or convert it into a housing type of.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that's sort of a niche within kind of our industry. The two sort of most common scenarios is raw land and building 80, 120, 300 apartments, either in the form of like a garden style apartment or a mid-rise apartment, or acquire an existing multifamily property, whether it's market rate or affordable, and renovating them, getting them up. Because the kicker with our program is you are in that project for at minimum 15 years. So there is no, we're going to buy it and flip it. It's a buy,
So you get a
hold it.
grant a lot of times through these programs to help kind of incentivize and make it work. You have a 15-year commitment.
Yeah, recently that's become more common. So if you
So
track
they
sort of,
attach that to the grants.
correct, yeah, they're usually so there's various federal, state, and local programs out there.
Yeah.
For instance, in after 2016 Hurricane Harvey, there was what's called CDB disaster relief money that was basically HUD says, hey, Texas, we see you had a really bad event here. You lost thousands of apartments and homes. And so to help in disaster relief, we're going to give you $1 billion. The government gives it to the state government. The state government issues it to one of the governing bodies. In this case, it was the General Land Office. They also gave an allocation to like Harris County in Houston because they sort of needed that direct allocation to kind of decide what they wanted to do with it best. And then they would say, okay, in exchange for taking 51% of the units or more, sort of a negotiation based on the amount you took, you promise to keep this unit affordable for 30, 40, 50 years in exchange for this free money. So, for instance, what I did back after this time was took, I think if I remember correctly, somewhere around $50 million and built, 6 projects
And you
using
said Texas, the Houston area? Is that
correct.
okay? So it's in the Houston area.
This was in the Houston area
Yeah,
because
of
they were impacted by Hurricane Harvey the
course.
most. So,
Yes.
yeah, so we take that money, we layered traditional debt on top of it, and run. In some cases, we layered it with low-income housing tax credits, which the way the LIHTC program works is we say this project's going to cost 20 million. The government has a calculation that it's in the IRS code, and they say basically in exchange for you agreeing to fix your rent to an index, which is the area median income for that county, we are going to give you a tax credit for 10 years, which for us really doesn't do us any good because it's like a tax credit offsetting what income. So instead, we commit those tax credits to an investor that has typically like a bank, or there's private investors as well, that want those tax credits to offset their own income. And then we sell them for 85 cents, 90 cents, 95 cents to the dollar.
Okay.
And that lump sum is then used as the equity for these projects, in addition to debt and other sources of funds, which most recently, because of construction costs and especially after COVID, that has become a big necessity.
So in raising debt, do you have like syndications and things where people will pull together and invest in certain communities and properties?
There is some of folks
Like, do you have a fund or anything that you allow people to invest in?
in the equity side. There are funds like
The
there
equity
there
side.
are syndication groups out there that's what they do. They bring developer with investor together,
Hmm.
and they have these big funds that have multiple projects and multiple tax credits sort of lumped into, and they so there is their own little yield calculation that they do in their end, which is sort of a black box. What we see at the end of the day is, hey, we're going to create $15 million of tax credits over 10 years. That's worth how much to you today? And there is some sort of supply and demand analysis that goes into it, and let's say that generates to us $10 to $12 million of equity. But yes, there is syndication on the equity side. On the debt side, it's a little more traditional. There are sort of 2 main buckets. There's one that's sort of conventional debt, and then the other one uses bonds, which is required under the IRS code.
Okay. They require you to tap into bonds as a part of your.
Yes, and to private activity bonds.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I can see why they would require it.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the trade-off.
Yeah.
So there's two buckets. There's what's called the 9%, which is competitive. Everybody submits a project. There's a scoring criteria. Every state has their own rules and regulations for how that is going to be distributed, and that's competitive because it generates the most amount of equity for your project. You can do the 4%, which is much less equity, but non-competitive. As long as your project meets threshold and is not in violation of anything.
And that's your yield? What's the 4%? What do you mean by that?
So that's just the name of the 2 buckets. So when you do the calculations of
You have to have 9% of one type and 4% of another type?
no, it's actually they look at the depreciable basis of the project,
Yeah.
and then they multiply it by. So let's say you did a project that's $20 million, and they look at what is the depreciable basis of that $20 million. Some things are eligible, some things are not. Like land is non-depreciable, so you take that out of there. You say you have $20 million. At the end of the day, you've got, let's say, $15 million of actual basis. Of that, you say, okay, well, my project is 100% affordable, so I can assume the full 15 million of that basis. If I did 50%, I'd only be able to take 50% of that basis, and then you multiply at the bottom 4% or 9% to generate the tax credit. So the 4% and 9% is really in reference to the calculation of those credits, not necessarily a yield of any type.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's part of your calculation.
Correct. Yeah,
Um,
it gets fairly complicated,
Yeah.
and there are things like boosts. If you're in a particular area, you're now eligible for 30% more. So there's lots of things that they can.
Incentives,
Yeah, they're
really?
definitely definitely incentives. They want you to
They have areas they
invest in
want to
areas.
grow, or they want to give incentives if you can get it in this space here.
Correct.
Yeah, and I can
Hmm.
see that. And you'll actually do raw lands. You'll do a full on from zero all the way through.
Yeah,
Okay.
the majority of what I've done in my career has been vacant land, and
Jefferson, what they do, right? JPI, they go and build a community. You're
mhm.
doing the same thing, but you're doing it through a whole different way of setting up your debts and your equity and all those type of things and the way it's built.
Yeah, and we've been part of master plan communities where, I did the first deal in Melissa, Texas, where we put in a family and a senior project, and that became sort of the catalyst of that particular area because you had all this raw land. We didn't
Yeah.
need all of it, but they asked us to put in a road, and then that road was sort of a dead end, and then someone can tie into that. We brought the utilities to that area, so there are some indirect benefits from our projects going in. As soon as they go in, a lot of times what we see is it sort of activates the space around it.
Could you not just build an apartment community wherever you want to, totally aside from government assistance or grants or things like that? Or is that's just not your mission? That's not what your business plan is.
If you had asked me that question,
You have all the ability to do. You have the contractors. You have everything you need to do it.
right. I mean, at the end of the day, what's the most important thing is financial feasibility. That's what it boils down to. 10, 15 years ago, yeah, you could pretty much pick anywhere and say, I want to build a project here. Construction cost was $75 a square foot. It
But
was
you're in a
easy.
special space that you have beneficial financial benefit operating in your space. You would be less beneficial to go outside of that space. Is that kind of what you're implying?
Well, it's a mathematical problem more than anything. So, for instance, if you split the two buckets separately, the 9% award by Texas, just using Texas as an example, and again, every state's different, but Texas specifically, they'll say, all right, here's our scoring criteria. If you're located, on this census tract, you will score, X number of points. And if you're on this census tract, because this one touched a project that was built in 2020, so that's valuable. Those are geographic advantages that's directly created by the state. When you get into the non-competitive, the 4%, it becomes a financial feasibility problem. The math, because construction costs went, especially after COVID,
Yeah.
we saw, I mean, back in the day, I could build something for $140 a square foot all day long. Now, just the building alone is $190 a square foot. So what happened, the tax credit wasn't really intended, I don't think in the 80s, to scale up indefinitely. It was sort of one of these things where they thought, well, that should be enough for a long time. And until Congress passes some legislation to change that, which it has over time, there's things that have occurred that have become more beneficial. There's legislation that was making its making the rounds that would have had a direct impact to us. But these are the kind of the cards we were dealt with right now. And so at that point, what ends up ultimately happening is you've got a gap. So let's say you've got a $20 million project, tax credits can only generate 10 million. You can only get 3 million of debt. Where does that additional 7 million come from? And so to answer your question, where we then have to go is say, well, who has $7 million to make that project feasible? And many times it's the city or the county, or there's some program that says, hey, I'm City of Houston or I'm City of Dallas. I've got $40 million that I want to use to develop affordable housing, and they'll issue a RFP or request for proposals and say, developers, come to us and tell us what you got. And so now we are not necessarily picking the geography sort of picking
Picking
us.
us, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're in that. How many other companies are kind of doing and operating in this space, you think? Seems pretty niche to me.
Yeah,
But I know there obviously everyone has always competition. But do you have other people that are operating and going for those same funds and offering competitive,
yeah,
bids against you?
it's extremely competitive. Years ago it was more close knit and it was smaller. Um, Now, I mean, it's a full spectrum. You've got mom and pop shops that, hey, there's just a nonprofit that wants to develop 20 units on a property that somebody grant gave to them. And then you've got massive corporations that have, balance sheets that would just, blow your mind, and everything in between. The thing about our industry, what makes it very unique and special, is that we're somewhat recession proof. And in fact, we do better in recessions than other folks. So what ends up happening is
Your
you'll have
target
these.
audience is sensitive to recession, I'm sure,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, if you
I
think
don't know if
about
that
it,
directly impacts you because your target audience is affordability. And
correct.
recession is extremely painful for them.
Yeah, it's extremely painful for them. So the demand for affordable housing goes up, and it becomes a very political issue. I mean, right now we're dealing with a housing crisis. I mean, I watched the debate last
What
night for
is the
whatever reason.
crisis from your perspective? What does that mean?
So we're in a very unique situation. The last recession or the last Great Recession, we had an abundance of supply and not enough demand.
Right.
Right. This time, and I think you've seen in the single family world, we've got plenty of demand but not enough supply. And what's happening is that as everything gets more expensive, it's becoming more and more difficult to provide. So right now, you've got thousands of people in the city looking for housing that they can afford.
And they're not making it easy or reasonable for you to be able to provide that to them.
Correct. I mean, our what we can charge in rent, in the market rate world, you increase rent to offset the cost. We can't really do that. We are capped on what we can charge for rent because again, we're supposed to be affordable. It's supposed to be
Huh.
someone who's making a family who's making 70,000 a year shouldn't
You're on
have
a
to.
percentage basis of income, the actual that's
Correct.
what's capping your rents.
Right. So the way it works is we
So
look
you're
at
not
the
Section 8 though.
Section 8 is a part of our world. So
Okay.
there are properties we worked on, or we accept Section 8 vouchers. We work with housing authorities. We work with government bodies that provide vouchers. We accept those.
So
Yeah.
it's really weird, right? So in my space, I applied for Section 8. I tried to get into that because I've
Hmm.
got rental properties.
Yeah.
And I didn't move forward with it. I think I was trying to do a voucher program from Tarrant County because I had 2 properties in Tarrant County.
Hmm.
And I was like, I'll go through the program. Why not? Let's do it and see
Hmm.
what happens. And I didn't end up finishing it for whatever reason. I ended up getting tenants other ways. But I can't tell you how many calls I got. Hey, do you accept vouchers or you accept Section 8? And they would say things to me like, hey, you're charging $1,850. If you'll accept me, you can collect $2,200. And they would tell me a new amount. It was always well more than what I'm renting it for.
Hmm.
I'm just saying, like, this is because the boundaries of zip codes and bedroom
Hmm.
counts, right? It's pretty clinical,
Hmm.
or it's unemotional, it's detached, it's not even considering the value of the property. It's just bedroom count, and this is what we're going to pay per bedroom count, so I can even rent it to them for more.
Yeah.
That's what they were telling me.
Yeah.
You're on the other end where that number is not changing high enough to make it profitable for you to even operate within it. Whatever they're offering in the Section 8 rentals and things like that. Is that why you say you have a pressure against, rent income on the Section 8?
Yeah. So I mean, we
Or is it
we
more complicated?
in some ways it's simpler, in some ways it's more complicated. We operate in the same sort of methodology. A lot of times vouchers um, are calculated based on fair market rent. So the HUD will look at census data and information, and they sort of are the ones at the top of the mountain saying, okay, for this county, this is what the income is based on census data. And so if you do the calculations, what's 30% of a household of four living in a 2 bedroom? This is what they can spend on rent, and that's what it is. So it's sort of independent because they're not able to get into the minutia and say, well, in Grand Prairie they charge you this much. So they're looking at sort of a broader,
Aggregate.
yeah, they're looking at different things. And so we sort of fall into that space. What our properties typically do is we set a income limit that's a percentage of the area median income. So many times it's 30%, 50%, 60%, 80% of the area median income. So when we get the census data or the new rents every year around March, April, we'll know what we can charge for rent that year. But what you've seen is, these rents are, people's incomes are not growing
Right.
exponentially. They're growing
But the
sort of
cost of you
gradually.
holding that is
Correct.
definitely going up.
Yeah, you've got, if you look at, if you put a graph, rents are going, income is going this way
It's one of the
and costs
funny,
are going this way.
the funny things they talk about, not to pick on, the Democrats on this, but they talk about these charts and that people really aren't going through a recession. They just think they are.
Mm.
And they have these charts that are showing, inflation's only gone up 3%, but it's 3% over already when it's gone up. The 20 or 30% has gone up already. But then they do that with income. They think income is going up as well. Income is well behind the inflation rate.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it is going up, and it's not going up fast, I think it's probably pretty average.
Mm-hmm.
When inflation is going that high, you think income would not be a 2 or 3% cost of living adjustment. It would be 4 or 5 or 6% just to keep up with inflation, but they're not. They're staying pretty static. So
Yeah.
the income increases are very small, but the cost that you have for holding the building, the insurance and the taxes is well beyond what the income's doing. So you are going to, at some point, you'll be upside down.
Oh yeah, and I mean a lot of folks. In fact, I
What
was
happens when
talking.
you're upside down? You get a tax discount or
No, unfortunately, a lot
you're
of
locked
folks
in?
are going through that right now. There are people, and I've unfortunately been working with several nonprofits over the last few months that are in this very position where they bought a property, it made sense at the time, and now they've just gotten their new tax bill, and they're just like, what are we going to do?
Yeah,
Because
we're upside down.
the great sort of myth is that us as developers, we're just cash flowing these things like crazy. But the truth is, you'll be surprised to see a 300 unit project that at the end of the day is only clearing 50, $100,000 in
Yeah,
net cash
it's a
flow.
lot of risk for a
So
very small amount of
the
money.
margin is so thin,
Yeah.
and we're just not able to anticipate a global pandemic. I mean, or a hurricane. In Houston specifically, to give you an example, forever and a day, I used to underwrite my projects at $350 a unit per year, right? For insurance. Now we have gone from 350, and then all of a sudden it was 1,000 after the freeze, and I'm getting quotes at 15, 1,800, 2,000. And to your earlier point, the what we're paying for staff isn't able to keep up with that. I mean, it's like we pay them 1,000 or 1,200 a door, and now it's 13, 14, 15. So it is increasing. We're trying to pay them as much as we can, but everything else in that bucket, as far as this is how much money we make, and these are the expenses going out. Well, that insurance is going up higher and higher and higher, and then you layer that for new projects, interest rates have gone up and up and up. So we're getting it sort of from all sides. So what ends up happening is the only way to make a deal feasible today, a new project, is to have some level of subsidy, or some kind of funds to close the gap.
Mm.
On the operations side, yeah, there are a lot of folks that are calling me saying, "Hey, I'm underwater." Many times, though, they're from the market rate world. They bought a property at a low cap rate that's way over um, leveraged, and now their operating expenses have eaten them alive. And they're saying, "Hey, Ruben, what is this tax credit program? How can I get into this?" Thinking it's going to solve all their problems, but not realizing that there are other metrics and equations that go into it. So it's not just easy. So to answer your earlier question about how big is our industry, it's grown quite a bit because the folks we sort of used to operate on our own, and market rates guys kind of stay on this side. Now they're starting to try to dabble into our space because the market. I mean, if we think we're struggling, the market rate guys are completely dead. You cannot make a project work at all. And I look at market rate stuff. I mean, I'm not exclusively affordable. I also look at market rate, single family for sale, different product types, and go through their underwriting practices and just say they're not feasible. What is feasible is affordable in some cases. And so that industry is now, as those folks are starting to go underwater, they're migrating into our world a little bit.
Hmm. Well, competition sometimes a good thing, and then sometimes it eats up your profitability opportunities.
Yeah, for sure.
How many projects do you think you have now? And does it work like that for you? Do you start one, or you just have like talking, or you're talking like 4 different cities, and just trying to get anything to take root?
It fluctuates, so the average life cycle of a project used to be 2 to 4 years, where you have a site, you go through due diligence, you submit for a funding application, you get the deal, you wait. Because again, we're dealing with government bodies,
Yeah.
and if anybody who's ever dealt with a government body knows they are extremely slow. So we're sort of sitting, waiting, 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 waiting. We get our award, we kind of figure it out. Um, you know, it, Everybody thinks the development is construction. Construction is like the tip of the iceberg. It's all the stuff you don't see.
Yeah.
It took 2 years to get to that point.
Yeah.
And then once you're under construction, your typical construction cycle is 15 to 18 months. Then you're leasing up, 6 to 8 months after that. You go to conversion, and then you hand over the keys, from beginning concept to end, somewhere in the 4 to 6 year range. That's when you hand over keys to asset managers, and now they're dealing with it. So as far as projects that I'm working on, it fluctuates. I mean, sometimes it might be one project, sometimes it's 20 projects. It just depends. And every state has different timelines, different application dates. I'm currently in Texas, Louisiana, Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, and they all have different things. And what we typically do is sort of that funnel approach of where we take a look at 100 projects, and of those 100 projects, 10 maybe work, and of those 10, 3 get awarded. And you're just hoping that you're getting more wins than losses and accumulating them over a long period of time. So it fluctuates. I mean, at one point I had 12 active projects at one time, where one was in concept, one was under construction, one was in lease up. And yeah, that was a busy schedule.
You are VP of development. Are there other VPs of development?
There are. So the way our company is sort of split up is we have sort of 3 regional hubs.
Yeah.
from just a pure logistics perspective, it's impossible to be in all 50 states. I mean, you're constantly in an airplane. Even us splitting into three regions, I'm still on an airplane quite a bit. And basically, we've got somebody in Wilmington, North Carolina, and they oversee sort of the Southeast. So your Tennessee, Georgia, Carolinas, Florida, sort of that part of the world. And then my office oversees Louisiana, Texas, sometimes Oklahoma, getting going far west as Nevada, Arizona, Colorado. And then we have an office by Seattle, and they touch Washington State and Oregon. And then, if there's a project in Iowa or something, we'll go there and we'll look at it. We're not really sort of strict as far as our footprints. It's just if a deal comes across our desk, we tag team or we'll look at it or we'll pass it on to whoever thinks is the best from a political influence or has access to that a little more readily available to them, and then we just go.
Do you have a target area you guys like? Is it normally around big cities? Because that's where you can have, because you have the most touch of a,
Yeah,
you did Melissa, that, I mean, that's out there. That's Anna Melissa. It's way north Princeton. It's pretty
mhm.
far out there, northeast Dallas, Fort Worth.
Yeah, that was pre-pandemic. I mean, at that time, our footprint was a little more, our reach was a little more extended because at that time there was a state program, and as long as you were in certain areas, it worked in rural projects. And that wasn't a rural project, but somewhat rural projects were a little more reasonable. Now, and it's not unique to us. This is every company is going through the exact same thing. It's wherever the money is, and so unfortunately, that means big cities tend to have the most money available to them for whatever reason. Sometimes it's
Or
allocated.
enough to do a job.
Yeah, they might have, 30, $40 million
Yeah,
that
it's
they've
hard to
sat
chase
on.
a $5 million job out in the country.
It is hard. You
It's
can
a lot of infrastructure to set up to,
a
and for
lot
very
of
small
finding
profitability.
subs out there, and yeah, there's a lot that, and also the rents are lower in those areas
Yep.
because they're more rural. So now you're needing more money. So it's kind of this treadmill where if I go there, the project is already on a bad spot, and I have to make even more money or get more money to fund it, and it's less likely. So that's
On
sort of
your own because the government can't help you because it's limited by the amount of economic availability for that.
pretty much,
So
yeah.
that's the scaling back because they have to borrow against, and that creates more debt.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's net operating income, right? I mean, it's how much
Sure.
how much cash flow can a property generate, and then that will let you leverage it. And the delta is got to be it has to come from somewhere. And recently, ARPA money was a thing that hit the street a couple years ago, and that's dried up. Hurricane Harvey money dried up. What breaks your heart is when you see money that isn't being used. There are times where um, you
You have a
know.
plan, an opportunity, and for whatever political reason, they say, nope, we're not going to use that money for that benefit
Mhm.
for whatever their political reason is.
Yeah, it's a bunch of different reasons to why something like that would happen, but you'll be surprised to see, HUD will allocate money to a city or a state, and they give back a portion of that money. So, like for instance, $100 million went
They give
back.
it back to HUD.
Yeah, they put a clock on it
Even there's
where
plenty of opportunities, they
they,
won't make use of them.
well, they kind of light a fire in them and say, look, you got 3, 4, 5 years to get this money out the door. Like we're not just gonna let you hold on to it indefinitely. Like it's taxpayer money. It needs to be used for the taxpayers, and it needs to go out. And so they usually put a clock on it and say, if you don't get that money out by a certain date, we're going to take back whatever you don't use.
And it could be you're in the middle of working out something with them, you run out of time. It could be different things, or they just say no, we're just not going to use it for that.
Yeah, I mean it's a
That
lot of
doesn't make sense,
it's
does it?
a lot of different
We're kind of
reasons.
looking at it out of a vacuum. I know there's other considerations, but you think in a space that needs help,
Mm-hmm.
there's money available. Why wouldn't they move forward and take advantage of the opportunity to give back to the community and take care of them? But there's always other factors in every
Yeah, I
deal.
mean, and to play devil's advocate, if I was in the city's position, you have this money, and you're trying to. I think their heart's in the right place. They try to say, well, where can we best use it? And so they create sort of wish list items. And I think there's sometimes a little bit of a disconnect on, from the developer side, what we're seeing in the market and what cities and states are seeing on their side of the market. There's a little bit of a different interpretation on what's going on. So there's a little bit of a communication breakdown that's occurring. And I get where they're coming from. They look at developers and say, well, you greedy developers, you're just here to make a buck. And, you're going to try to take as much money from us as possible because it hits your bottom line. And some of that is true. And some are more egregious than others. But at the end of the day, we're trying to solve the same problem. We're both trying to provide housing. Now, yeah, do we have an incentive to do it in the form of a developer fee? Yes, and that's something that separates us from the market rate guys. Market rate guys are all cash flow. They want to be in a property for 3 to 5 years, sell it at a lower cap rate. They're spreadsheet guys that are saying, "Hey, we're going to make a 25% rate of return."
Let me ask you
We don't
something.
operate in
I
that
want to
space.
focus on that for a moment, right?
Mhm.
So you and I have something in common. You first got into the business as a leasing agent working in an apartment complex. You're far from that now. But it's funny because I did the same thing and I worked for, it was a temp agency. It was called Burnett Guile. So I grew up here as well.
Is that BG staffing again?
Yes.
Okay, same place I went. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
So how
both
about
we're,
that?
we're both
How
alums.
about that? We're alums. The
Look
2 day
at that.
program.
Look at that. Man, the
So they were
talent that comes out of that place.
it's a temp agency, so you have a community, right? And they normally staff, I don't know, say a 500 unit, or no, it's probably a little big, 300 unit complex. Maybe have
Mhm.
2 or 3 salespeople working,
Yeah.
right? And they they have to have someone on staff every day of the week. And in the event that they need to take off, they'll go to a temp agency like
Mhm.
Burnett Guile that trains leasing agents that know how to show places, that know how to read a lease, they know how
Yeah.
to set everything up. So they'll send you all these different places. I went to 3 different places, but one of them was a JPI place. So
Okay. Yeah.
Jefferson at Preston was one of the places I went to, but Jefferson JPI builds and they name themselves on all these different buildings, and eventually they change their names to whoever the new owner is, right? But their objective was to they were developers. They would max out to as whatever percent they think is a legitimate ending, 95%,
Mhm.
and then they would sell it for the low cap rate, right? Because they're a clean brand new complex at 95% max value.
Mhm.
It's new, 95%. That was their strategy. They didn't want to be anything long term.
Mhm.
This is how it was years and years ago. I don't know if they still use that same strategy. So you have a commitment when you build these things that you stay on and manage them.
Mhm.
I mean, I know that's a big deal. So you'll own or have ownership or management of all these different places that you're developing. Is that true?
Yeah, for a minimum 15 years.
How
That's
many how many do y'all have in on standing? Like 30, 40, 50?
I mean, I think last time I looked at our REO schedule, we had north of 6,500 units currently that we own. I mean, we've sold things off.
6,500 units, as
Correct.
in one unit is a complex.
No, no, units as an apartment unit. So
6,500 units
I
you're
don't.
currently carrying,
Correct.
managing, and you
Hmm.
are like you're hiring the staff, you're handling the maintenance.
Well, we have third party management. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Hmm.
You can buy your own apartment complex. You don't have to manage it. You can
Correct.
have a third party.
We're
That's right.
we're asset managers. So so
So you
from
own the complex. You have a third party that takes care of the rents and the maintenance and all that stuff.
correct. So we'll select a reputable management company to come in and that has, and this is sort of a niche in its own self. There's property managers that understand and operate affordable housing projects or developments. And the biggest criteria is the understanding of compliance. Because when you're dealing with federal money and you're dealing with state money, ultimately someone's going to say, are you using that money wisely? And this is what separates us from a lot of folks. People look at us and they say, "Oh, that affordable housing," da, da. And they always reference these 70s vintage properties that have slumlords, and they think we're the same thing. And I'm like, no, we are.
You're building new
We're
facilities.
building brand new. If we buy something that's existing,
You're going to restore it to brand new.
we're putting 60, 70, $80,000 a door
Oh my
into
gosh.
these properties. So brand new, practically brand new units.
That's a lot of money.
And not only that, but I have to pass rigorous inspections, not only just for the
Yeah.
city,
Yeah.
from the state, from the feds.
Yeah. Because it's
Any,
all their money.
anybody put a dog on that property, they're going to make sure. And you'll be surprised the things that they will catch you on to say, "Oh, you forgot to, I don't know, there is some soap scum on the toilet, on the bathtub. That's a point deduction." Or, "Oopsie, the little door stopper is a little old. That's another point." I mean, there's little things like that that they are really making sure, which is good. I mean, you're using taxpayer money or tax credits, and
But you don't have a $20,000 toilet though.
right.
You're a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, exactly. Now we're we try to walk that line very closely, where you don't want to build junk and you don't want to build something cheap, partly because you're going to
If
own
you
it for
got
15
15
years.
years in it, you don't want all plastic.
It's got to last.
We
It's
got to
got to
have some
last you
materials.
15 years. But you also want to be careful where you're not abusing it and saying, "Well, I could have built this thing for 15 and I built it for 25."
Yeah.
You're kind of walking that line. And then ultimately, I always look at it from, if I was going to live in that unit, what would I want to see? So do we put granite countertops? Do we put nicer features? Do we put nice amenities,
I think
services?
everybody should, at a default, do granite at this point.
I think
It
it's the
isn't that
minimum.
much more, and it lasts forever.
It's the minimum. It's the
I
minimum.
flipped 100 houses. I finally just stopped asking. I just like put it in everything. Just put it in.
Yep.
It's cheap.
Same
You do
here.
vinyl plank for your floors.
Vinyl plank. Yep.
I think everybody's gone to that.
Yeah, I think everybody sort of
It's
got off the carpet.
inexpensive and it's waterproof and it's durable and it
Lasts a
looks
long
good.
time. It lasts a long time, and
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you look at our apartments; they're really no different than the Class A apartments you see that are brand new. The only difference is maybe some of the amenities are a little different, and we also provide services. That's a big part of our program. We provide things like after-school tutoring, financial literacy classes.
So that's a part of your grant connection and attachment is they'll have requirements that you have community involvement or build
Yeah,
into
I
it.
mean, it varies by state. Some are more rigorous about it, and some are not so much. We do it as a best practice no matter what, because there's a certain, from a reputation
Reputation.
perspective, we
Yeah.
want to make sure that folks are saying, okay, when we live in these communities, we're getting something that not the typical renter will get. A lot of times I work with nonprofits that have mission oriented and have specific populations they want to service. So, like for instance, we worked on a project that we allocated a certain number of units for the homeless, and that's a very specific population that has very specific needs, and it was best to bring in an organization that's what they focus on, and that's what they wanted to provide as a service, and they're providing like the not caretaking but like support structure for them. And we provide the housing, which, there isn't a singular solution to any problem. We can only provide, we're trying to do our part, but we have to take more of a holistic approach. So that means bringing in folks that have very specific things that, like for instance, Boys and Girls Club, we will approach them and say, hey, you need facility, you need space, you need something, we can provide you that space. Or what we have done recently in some of the clubhouses, which I've always been sort of anti-clubhouse because it's like, well, it's a marketing gimmick and you have this space that you're air conditioning and it's not being used. So I said, well, what if we turn that space into something that's actually beneficial to the residents and to the larger community? And so we started putting in Galleria space. And it's a flex space that can be used as a Galleria. And the thought there was, okay, well, let's, take a local artist to come in and, they can display their work, but also they can provide a program to kids to come and show them the arts. And then these kids can put their artwork on the wall and actually get some sort of benefits. Hey, look what I did, and
Yeah.
inspire the next generation, because
So
that's very
then
important.
usually leasing offices are based out of clubhouses,
Mm-hmm.
most apartment complexes. So now they have now conformed them to just small offices and they just show apartments and they're no longer the clubhouse is no longer part of their space.
No, it's still part of their space. It's just that it has multiple purposes. So rather than, like, for instance, you'll go into a standard clubhouse, right? You have the office for the manager and the
Yep.
assistant and whatever, and then you have like a little lobby, and then you have like a community room, whatever.
Little kitchen,
Yeah, a little
kitchenette
kitchen,
space.
and 90% of the time it's vacant. No one's in there. Maybe somebody pops in to watch a random baseball game in the middle of the day, but for the most part, it's not really used. So what we said is like, okay, well, what if we had a flex space that could be used for different things? So
Gotcha.
we built out a space that today it's a galleria, but these are on these modular stands, and they can be sort of pushed aside and put into a closet. And then now we put out chairs and desks, and now we're going to have an AA meeting today, and the next day it's going to be tables and chairs for kids, and they're going to do after school tutoring, or we'll have like a 3D printing seminar, and they come in and learn how to 3D print and create toys, and they can see how to do things, and STEM programs, and that space is now going from just a pure marketing thing where you walk in and think, oh, this is a nice building. So now it's actually being activated and used because staff goes away at 6 o'clock, and from 6 to 10, it's just sitting there vacant. Why not use that space for something that the community actually needs?
I like it.
Yeah.
What do you feel in your business your biggest needs are? Like what do you really need help with?
A lot of things. The things that typically kill deals is the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard folks that come in and say, well, we don't want this here. And the most common phrase you'll hear at any city council meeting,
It'll lower my value.
yeah, you're going to
It'll
lower my value, it's going to increase crime, blah, 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 blah.
Increase traffic.
Which there are statistics that show that that's not true. And what you always hear, and unfortunately from the political folks, is, I support affordable housing. I just don't support it here.
Of
And it's
course.
like, okay, well then, and I've built stuff out in the county, out in the city, in different places, and that's always a common theme. It's like, well, at some point you're going to tell me where can I build it because it seems like I can't build anywhere. So I think we need to
Well, that
like,
landfill that we have, we're not
oh
using it.
yeah, yeah, you can do there and then build it behind and put a giant wall that someone can see. It's like, okay. So I think what we need is education for folks to know what exactly is what we're doing, political support because I think we are trying to battle this housing crisis, and at this point, it is a housing crisis, and I think people need to see that and be more vocal and saying, look, it's not just going to happen on its own. It's not going to just magically appear. There has to be more sort of support for that, and I think it's easy, sort of low hanging fruit for a lot of politicians. We just need them to, join the conversation with us. And what we don't want to do anymore is be sort of an adversarial relationship where we're the developer, you're the politician, and we're trying to just go at each other. We are now, many folks have done this, and I've done this my entire career, have invited them to the conversation and say, look, we're trying to solve the same problem. How can we come together? And I will give credit to many folks that I've worked with, and many of the politicians I've worked with over the years have done exactly that, where they've given me the time. I was in New Orleans recently meeting with a city council person, and they were like, yep, we want to help you. We want to do this. Here's what I can do. Here's what I can't do. And it's like, okay, we'll figure something out. So a lot of times they're willing and to do it. The problem is there has to be the dollars to make them happen. And so, I think that is very important that we just
What
kind of continue
dollars? What does that mean?
to fund those funding gaps. We, like I said, we have a $20 million project. We can go raise $5 million of debt, $10 million of equity, but where does that other $5 million going to come from?
Yeah.
And there's not anything. I can't raise rents. I can't cut expenses. So where else can I generate dollars for these projects?
Isn't the
And
same flat space that they use or that you're using, won't the city collect less tax for that same? I just wonder, like, other really pressing matters that affect them. Because the only reason, cities like multifamily is because it generates a lot of tax revenue, right? But in communities like where I live, they don't want any multifamily, which I understand. I mean, that there's a lot of communities that are really against it. They don't want high density. They're looking for their values of the properties, and they do consider those things as deterrents to the value of their properties. But using the same amount of square foot of land, are you about the same as anything else?
yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, relative to other things that could potentially go in, like let's say you take a 3 acre site. How many houses can you put there? 9, 10 houses, something like that. I can put 80 units. So the taxable basis is higher,
Sure.
and especially during vacant land. I mean, a lot of times you just got vacant land. Or like for instance, recently the phenomenon is, we're working with a lot of churches. So churches will have vacant land that right now is $0 to the tax roll because they're tax exempt.
Yep.
But by us acquiring that site or working with a church, the church is still involved. They still can provide.
Can they own it and donate and still get the zero tax benefit?
What do you mean? The church donates the land to the
Yeah.
site?
Yeah.
I mean, they could. They're not. They're not
There's not
going
much. There's
to.
no benefit for
A
them.
lot of these churches, especially after the pandemic, what
Would
we're
they retain
finding.
the land and they get to keep the zero tax base and put an apartment complex on? Or they're not allowed to use that land for that because you have to get it rezoned.
I mean, technically, they could own the land and like do a land lease
Yeah.
and be exempt for the land, but the
Yeah.
building structure
Yeah.
itself is
Okay.
still taxable. So at the end of the day, even if they can kind of finagle it, there's still going to be an increase in taxes because they're going from $0. Even if the property only produces $50,000 of taxes a year, it's still something. And in addition to that, you have to also look at the economic benefit of you're building a 20 something $1 million project in your city. That's sales tax. That's your folks going to Home Depot. There's residual benefits outside of just the long term
Of course,
taxes
yeah.
of it.
The
Yeah.
sales tax will go up too because you have more people in the area buying. Let me ask you, this just kind of, I like to look at problems and try to solve problems too.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you something. So we have a big problem with baby boomers, and not a problem with them, but over 55 is going to be an enormous
Yeah, it's huge.
opportunity. It's huge, and we don't have enough housing to really address that overwhelming demand that's going to be coming.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are going to be in your target. Wouldn't it be interesting if there was some type of common product, and even if it's lower size scale that you're used to, maybe it is only a 50 unit complex or something that you could define, separate, clean up, and it fits maybe on acreage next to a church or something you commonly find. I see churches all the time with massive space. They
Hmm.
buy land before everybody else gets out there. They have plenty of acreages. Their church isn't going to grow and use it. So why couldn't that part of it be utilized in some type of building that's not monstrosity, but
Hmm.
something smaller that can be done on scale where you can build these at a really good, effective price and consistently do these over and over again like that. It's meeting the demand in the small areas one at a time. I don't know. I'm thinking
Hmm.
like this common, like you could be the target of multifamily. Like it's, we build the same building, it's the same 50 units. It works really well with the church and we have a specific purpose and I don't know. I'm just thinking out
Yeah,
loud.
that's amazing because you just came up with that in what 30 minutes of conversation. It took me 2, 3 years to get to that same conclusion and trying to do the exact same thing. I'm to the unit count in
I mean, you can't
Colorado.
save a whole lot, but you can save and you can duplicate and you can use the same contractors, the same everything. And it's just a systematized.
Yeah, I
And no
mean,
one's going to say no to a small unit that's benefiting the community. I say no one, everyone, there always have people
there's
that
always
try.
going to be someone who complains no matter
But
what.
the church wins. They're not using the land. Now we can help the elderly, and they're going to probably partner with them, right? Because they want to be a part of that community and everything, and they'll probably be a part of it. But
So I'll
anyway,
take that a step further. It's not only solving the housing crisis, but you're also helping churches. It's funny you said that because I'm doing this again, 50 units. You even called it 50 units right now in Colorado, where it's a church that owns a piece of property. They have 6 acres. They're not doing anything with. It's not generating income. Their congregation is shrinking, and we're going to try to build 50 units right next door to them. And it does two things. One, it provides housing. It's for seniors as well. Seniors can be somewhat problematic sometimes though because the construction costs goes up
yeah, yeah,
because they're elevator served
yep,
buildings. You
yep.
can't build a 4-story walk up. So you have to account for they're more expensive.
Well, and you have to make it, what do you call it, ADA and everything else, bigger
Correct.
doorways, everything else.
Yeah, there are unique challenges to seniors in that you like for instance, the minute you go to an elevator served building, more than likely you're building one mid-rise building that's 4 or 5 stories. Now you've got air conditioned space, corridors. It becomes a different product type. Garden style, where you have a 3-story walk up, is on a per square foot basis cheaper to build, but senior, to your point, is doesn't get the
Well,
same
maybe it's not
NIMBYism.
50, or maybe it's 50 on a 3-story that's bigger. I mean, there's got to be something that there's just the niche that everything wins.
Yeah, a
The
lot of
cost is
times.
low. It effectively targets that community. You don't
Yeah.
have to go out of your way to build it.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, there is kind of what ends up always occurring is that it becomes a mathematical thing. We look at okay, what is available in this particular area. Every city, state, county is different. Income levels are different, so it's very difficult to take a concept and
Go
replicate it a
Not
thousand
go put it in
times.
another state, another community.
You typically can't do that. Everyone is
I gotta
very sort of
think though,
bespoke.
everyone has old people.
Oh no,
There's
it's
plenty
a,
of towns that have churches out on the outskirts that have big lots.
assisted
You
living.
think this is just like land right in everybody's backyard because everyone's dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's getting a church to say, well, two things. They know they want to do something, but they don't know what. And there's all these folks that are coming promising things, and they want someone they can trust. So it takes a long time to sort of broker that relationship and saying, look, we hear you,
I can see that.
and also there. But it's funny you bring up churches because most recently, after COVID, their congregations shrank quite a bit, and they have not recovered from that.
Overall, church in general has shrunk.
Correct, but
Overall.
yeah,
And the small churches are especially dying.
and especially with folks that have older congregations that are
Yeah.
dying off.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these churches are now coming to us and saying, Ruben, we can no longer support this church by passing the basket around. Like it's now, we need to be more nimble and start thinking about ways that we can bring in cash flow, um, eh, utilizing what we've got. And our biggest asset is our land. Our church is not expanding. We're not building a campus. We've got, 50 acres to our name because somebody donated to the church and they're just sitting on it. And everyone's like, well, we can do something here. And the city loves it because now that's going to increase their tax roll. And we've come to these churches and say, look, we want to build something that you're going to be proud of. I've actually done quite a number of projects with churches where we built something, and guess what? A lot of the tenants in that building is in their congregation, and they really love that they can just
I
walk
told you there's a
across the
community
street.
that ends up being built. I
Oh yeah,
promise you.
a
I've got a
hundred
nursing
percent.
home outside of a small church we used to attend, and they were immediately connected. And they have nothing to do
Oh
with
yeah,
each other. But they would go out there on Tuesdays and then do, some type of visit with the people living there.
yeah, and they
I tell you, this is
now.
really simple. You know what an avatar is in general when you're talking about marketing and identifying a particular client, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our client is a 100-member church. It's on 5+ acres. It's in a city of 10,000 plus. And then you now have a brochure that says here's a before and after.
Mhm.
Here's a before and after. This is how we made the connection. And you send that to every church in America that fits this criteria.
Mhm.
I bet you get 10% calling you and saying, hey, we're interested.
Yeah.
I'm just going way beyond what we're talking about.
No,
But if you had a specific product and say, hey, we're going to paint it and build it in the same material as your church, but just the exterior,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So it cosmetically looks the same. You can even use our facility.
Mhm.
We have spaces in there that allow your church to now gain additional benefit and access.
Mhm.
There's other ways that these things start flowing together. And, especially out in the country, outside the main cities, a lot of the congregation is going to end up in those facilities anyway. They might as well have that relationship building.
Yeah, no, I mean, kudos to you because you come up with a concept very quickly that our industry is slowly getting to. Like we're in the
Well,
hour
you're
that
in a
we.
slow moving industry anyway.
Well, everybody's trying to. I mean, we're kind of like mice in the dark, trying to figure out where the cheese is and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. What has been very successful for me personally, which is sort of unique because not everybody. Churches are very much a relationship based
100%. I've
organization.
been in them. And I know someone from the outside coming in, we had to get a tower put
Uh-huh.
in the back of our church on our facility. And I
Mm-hmm.
was on the board. This is,
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago. It's been a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think, well, we don't make enough money to cover the pastor. So, of course, throw it up there. But it took us like 2 years to come up with the agreement to put I think it was a Verizon tower or something, telephone tower. And they make it in the color of the church. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a big tower city. Everybody knows what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it now produces income that covers the shortages that we had in our statement. And it was kind of like, but it took a while to even get that approved.
Something that is also kind of making the rounds. Again, you're right on the cutting edge here. There is legislation sort of making its rounds, and I think California, if memory serves, is going to be the first state to try this, where churches are exempt from the sort of normal zoning process. Because a lot of times the
Hmm.
churches have a site and it's zoned for church or whatever specific use, and multifamily is not an allowed use. But because of the shrinking congregations and the shrinking, and these churches are just doing everything they can to survive, there is legislation, and we're
To allow
hoping
them the
to
flexibility.
say you as a church can do whatever you want on your site. You could build an apartment complex, you
I
can
don't know
build
if they're going
whatever.
to do that, but
But
they
it
may
gives
allow for
them a
multifamily.
toolkit,
Yeah,
a tool in the toolkit to allow them. And so what would end up happening is there will be sort of a
because they'll
gold
build a
rush.
pawn shop or something.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you, a lot of times what kills us is not so much the a lot of times we get killed by the zoning process. We're a property, and the minute you have to go to public meetings and say, hey, we want to change something that's single family residential to multifamily. That is a completely at the discretion of the city council. And the minute somebody pops in and says, I do not like this project, you city council person, or will not get my vote, they're more likely to kill your deal and say goodbye to it. So there's a lot of property that is vacant land that's just prime property that is vacant. No one can figure out anything to do with it. But because it can't get past the zoning hurdle, it just sits there. So
Yeah.
hopefully there will be a gold rush where people will go to these churches and say, let's go ahead and develop your property. You're exempt from the zoning process. That's one box that we can check, and we just go straight into planning, design, financing, and I think that will pick up steam. I hope to see it in other states. There these sort of eliminating the barriers of entry. Again, how do we get to this housing crisis? There are too many barriers, too many hurdles to jump to get to a project. It's not easy to build. Everybody just wants to see single family, which is great. You can house 9 people on a 3-acre lot, or you can build 80 units and house 80 families. And people aren't doing that math in their head, and they're thinking, well, this is just better for us because there's less people, less. But there's so many barriers as it is that anything we can do to eliminate those barriers in ways that are not sneaky or trying to go around anything, but rather, again, fulfilling the intent of the program is addressing the housing crisis and providing housing and making sure if we can knock out 2 birds with one stone, where churches are now have identified a new income stream where they're able to keep the lights on and now fund. And what I really appreciate with the churches I'm working with is how creative they are, saying it's like, look, we're no longer just a church. Now we are a food bank. Now we are XYZ services or nonprofit. And this is now just one income stream. And we're using the housing to, again, because at the end of the day, the church is there to serve the community, and they're doing that and finding a more sustainable way of doing it rather than just saying, hey, let's have mass on Sunday and pass the basket, which that is going down. They need something to keep them. So this is sort of a nice sort of intersection where both needs are being met. And that's something that gets me excited, because I think that's what the program really excels at, is sort of solving 2 problems at once.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Any last things that you want to share?
Yeah, I invite folks to be very active, to learn more about the housing crisis and what folks are trying to do. Legislation is constantly being talked about. A great organization to look at here in Texas is TAP, and I can provide you some links to reference folks. There's some good information out there. There's some great podcasts out there folks want to listen to. Educate yourself on what we're trying to do. Pay attention to what's going on in Congress because right now we're in a deadlock and there's only so much we can do until new legislation gets passed. And I invite folks to educate themselves and learn more about what's going on in the world.
Do you have a way that people can reach you?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is via email. My email address, I can give it to you. It's R as in Ruben, E as in Echo, S as Sierra, Q as in Quebec, U as in Uniform, E as in Echo, D as in Delta, A as in Alpha, at blueridgeatlantic.com. People can email me. I allocate a lot of my time to talking to folks, even if it doesn't mean it goes anywhere, but there are folks that want to say, hey, Ruben, I have a question, or hey, I'm in an organization that maybe I'm a church that owns land, or I'm a property owner that's heard of affordable housing but don't know if it's an option for me. I'm very happy to pick up the phone, answer an email, talk about it, and you never know where it can go. So I always say I like to be a resource to other folks in any way I can.
Yeah. Well, Ruben's been easy for me to communicate and talk with. He shared everything. Very straightforward. I really appreciate that. So
Yeah, thanks.
feel free to subscribe to my channel. I've got more great interviews that are coming up. Thank you for coming out, Ruben. I
No,
appreciate it.
thank you very much. Really
And
enjoyed
I'm
talking
sure
to
I'll
you.
see you again sometime.
I'm sure we'll run in the hall here very soon.
All right. Till next time. Thank you, guys.